Hi everyone. Here
Hello.
we are, with Paul Newson, who's the founder of the Newson's Place.
Mhm.
Now it's now how it's called, right?
Yeah, we changed the name. It sounds a bit better and
Yeah,
shorter.
yeah. And I'm Еленой Вертугиной. I'm the founder of the project Живой Английский in St. Petersburg. And Paul is with us here from Moscow. Yeah.
Pleasure to be
And
here.
yeah. And this interview, this video is going to be connected with some issues that students have while learning English. And we're going to talk through, well, different life questions, because I think the students are very interested in your life, Paul, in how you work, and some opinions that you have on everything. Okay?
Okay, fair enough. I'll do
Yeah.
my best.
First of all, a bit of history. Do you remember when we got acquainted?
I do, yes. I do, because I first met you in the pub, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was the first face-to-face meeting, but we
Yeah.
actually got acquainted before.
Oh, was it St.
Yeah,
Petersburg?
yeah, no. You were so kind. I wrote to you
Oh,
about the
yes,
Faces Festival. It
yes.
was 2016 Faces Festival, and you were so kind to shoot a little video for us.
That's right. I remember. Yeah,
Yeah, about games.
that's right.
Yeah. So it is nice, and I'm still showing it to my students, and they
Oh, it's
like it.
nice. I've
Yeah.
actually got a lot more time to do such things now because I'm sort of teaching less, which is nice. Um,
Well, this is great. This is
yeah.
great. So hopefully you will come in April to St. Pete's, and
I'm now,
we
yeah,
will
because
have.
now I'm not kind of tied down to specific times anymore, so it's absolutely fine. So I can actually start doing things and living a normal life.
Great. I'm glad to hear that.
Fantastic.
Well, so my first question will be, what would you say would be maybe the most crucial mistakes that students make when they start learning languages? What they shouldn't do?
Cool. That's a tough question because there's so many of them. I mean, of course, it depends on the level. Say, like from beginners or from the early stages. The funny thing is, I think it's more about the actual psychology of the student more than the actual, say, methodology. I think that many students, when it comes to sort of language, because you're actually performing in front of other people, it's not some kind of learning process which is sort of quiet and personalized. And students often really do fear, what their classmates may think of them, about appearing weak or making mistakes in front of others, about what teachers might think of them. And so I think a lot of students, when they start, kids, teens, adults, they put themselves under sort of huge amounts of pressure. And I often find, regardless of the level, that I have to spend the first few weeks sort of, really installing that kind of confidence and self-belief among the students, because when that's there, then the whole learning process becomes a lot easier.
Yeah.
That for me is, I think, one of the biggest problems that I tend to face. So
Yeah,
trying to
I
sort of,
completely agree. Yeah.
yeah, trying to sort
When
of
it
mold
comes
the
to
student.
yeah, when it comes to teaching a group, you need to first to make them a team, so
Yes,
that they are not
exactly.
afraid of making mistakes in front of each other. And
Exactly. It's
yeah,
about really installing that kind of family environment where, and there's a lot of tactics that can be involved in applying that and actually achieving that effect. And I think that when that sort of family atmosphere is installed into that classroom, then students fear nothing, and they just speak without any issues, and progress is just so much quicker.
yeah. Okay, let's suppose that they are already comfortable
Hmm.
and they're kind of enjoying the atmosphere, but they are still afraid of speaking.
Hmm.
So when it comes to doing different exercises, they're pretty fine. Maybe discussing things in pairs or in
Yeah.
groups, but when it comes to speaking in front of the class, so any pieces of advice how
Yes,
to?
because students are often okay working in pairs because they're not feel it. They don't feel that they're being sort of spied upon by the teacher or something, or having to perform in front of the larger class as a whole. And so I tend to wait to do such activities like presenting for a few weeks. So I let the students acclimatise to the group itself, to get to know each other, to find that warmth and comfort, and so to allow that self-belief to kind of blossom, so to speak. So I always start off with, say, like pair work for the first, say, month or so. And then when I realize that they're kind of, say, blossoming, and then I can move on to more challenging tasks where they have to sort of perform in front of the class, when I realize that the students are not, maybe, especially with kids and teens, that they're not kind of maybe mocking each other or criticizing each other, or there's not one student who always likes to be the leader of the class, so everyone's in the same way. Only then I would make a good sort of clear judgment that yes, we can move on to such presentations where a student can stand in front of the class and perform.
Okay, I see. Good approach. Well, I also give them a piece of advice so that they need to not concentrate on the others. Well, how the others will actually, what they will think about you and how they will react to mistakes. But others are also important, but in terms of what you want to say to them, to this particular person. So if you stop bothering about your own presentation and start thinking about this another person and what you want, what kind of message you want.
I understand what you mean. So it's like as if you're trying to tell that student, don't worry, everything's going to be fine, you can manage. I never say that to the student. It's my tactic. What I do, I try to kind of use sort of the reverse psychology, or I try to be subtle with how I approach this. So I would never like openly say to a student who's going to perform, okay, you can do it, I believe in you, because that could make them even more nervous. So what I sort of tend to do in those first crucial few weeks is that I sort of try to be very subtle. So I say, do you know what, who here, hands up, who here is afraid of making mistakes? And you'd be surprised, everyone puts their hands up. So that student can look around and go, oh, it's not just me then. And then I say, like, do you fear that, like, you know, in your schools where you learn English, do you get like criticized making mistakes? Yes, everyone puts their hands up generally, or most students do. And so I try to find that sort of commonality among students. I think that thing that they can all sort of, well, just sort of understand that they're not alone. And when they have that feeling, then there is that ability to perform because they're not worried anymore, because they know that they're not alone. And when I often tell students, you know, how do you feel about your English? Oh, it's rubbish and I can't do it. And everyone says that, you know, like to some extent. And then it's just for the students to understand that, yeah, you're not alone. So, you know, you're probably worried that like what other people are going to think about you. Because there's a famous psychologist who once said, we spend too much time worrying what people think about us when no one's thinking about us at all in reality. And I kind of install that into my students. So just by, you know, asking some random questions or even praising appropriately after doing certain tasks to kind of give that confidence. And so I never put students on the spot when I say, okay, you can do it, you're fine, I believe in you. Because again, that is really, I think that's sort of too much in the face, so to speak. So I like the kind of very subtle approach and sort of build up that confidence in a very sort of, I suppose, yeah, kind of stealthy way.
Yeah, right. And a lot of students, they want more grammar. Yeah, they think that there's not enough grammar in their life, and they want more. So what would you say to those students?
Well, I've had that many times, surprisingly more among adults who, you know, they're just into the grammar. And I remember teaching a pre-intermediate class a few years back, and I had a lawyer who says, oh, Paul, can we do something called passives and participles? I'm like, I was like, Padajdi is like, you know, spokojnie, you know, let's kind of do the basics first. Let's learn to walk before we can run. I admire your enthusiasm. I really like it, but I don't want to really disrupt the flow of the lesson. And so if I kind of might just sort of say to a particular student at the end, like, you know, it's like, this is how it works, but it is really complicated. We've got more stuff to do first. And again, I sort of also tell students that, you know, grammar is important, but there's a lot more to it than that. I mean, we need to build a vocabulary base. We need to build our skill sets, you know, our reading comprehension, our skills of listening, all of that. And it's just like a big, it's like just so many ingredients to make that pie. And grammar is just a part of it. And if you focus, and I often use this classic example with my classes when students do ask for grammar. And I say to them, you know, knowing grammar is good. You know, you don't need to worry about all the terminology and all, you know, what it means, because when I learned German, when I finally started living in Germany, I didn't need that anymore. I was just able to speak. And only if I wanted to show off and show my knowledge, I explain the grammar. But I tell students that, like, okay, imagine you're in a business meeting and you need to basically clench that business deal. Just telling your clients that you know present perfect is not going to help. You know, you really need to be able to develop a vast array of skill sets. So your vocabulary, the persuasive language to negotiate, and also your confidence and your ability to articulate yourself properly. So it's just like a piece of a large pie, so to speak. And that's what I think. Oh, that's true. It's like, yes, of course.
That's right. I even think that we create this vicious circle when from schools, students are so obsessed with grammar and they keep learning grammar again and again and again. And when they finish, They do not speak, actually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's wrong. I understand why, because I think what a lot of people like about grammar, and I see this on like Facebook communities and VK communities. People like that logical approach. They like that kind of, because like if we talk about Russians in general, like Russians do like this, these problem-solving tasks, all these kind of logical problems
Structure.
to solve, like
Structure. We need
structure. It's interesting to look at this and how that goes, and I kind of understand where I understand why they do that, but. When it comes to sort of general language learning, again, it's just a piece of the pie. It's like, it's for us as teachers to really enforce all those other areas as well and sort of move away from it a bit.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I want to refer to your experience of learning Russian as a foreign language.
It might be embarrassing.
Well, but it will give very good example and very good comparison between what is the next. I mean, what is the nearest to learning a foreign language rather than learning just not learning your own language. Yeah, getting it from the very childhood. When did you first start doing that?
Well, learning Russian.
Yes.
When I first arrived, I picked up Russian pretty quickly. I would say I understand about a good 80%. I probably
tell people when it was, because not everybody knows.
Yeah, so I've been in Russia for almost 14 years. I came in 2006, and I thought about staying for just 1 year, and so I learned some Russian to get by. But actually, I fell in love with the place, and I decided to stay forever. And I kind of, in the first sort of 2 years, I learned a reasonable amount of Russian, I would say. But then I would say it came down to my sort of priorities, because obviously I had a baby daughter, I had a family back then, and I had to work 24/7 and earn a lot of money, and I had to do that by teaching, and so I had to basically forfeit a lot of my Russian classes, and so I started to pick up bits here and there, and I kind of continued. And then when I opened my own school, it's like I've not had a chance to learn anything because I've been focusing on running this thing and creating courses and stuff. But my Russian, I've learned a lot by literally mirroring what people say, and I listen very attentively to specific structures, word order, and things like that. And so,
any formal studying, any textbooks?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes me sound really horrible, doesn't it? Like, I've been here for so long, and people are going to think I'm some ignorant, horrible, ignorant man. But it's like, no, I had a textbook that a teacher provided when I first got here. And the trouble is, I stayed with this teacher for about 1 year, but I lost interest pretty quickly. Not in Russian, but in the teacher. Because
what was the approach? Do you remember when you started with the teacher?
It was very grammatical as well. Very grammatical. And the funny thing is, for me as a linguist, because when I learned German at university, I was very much into sort of like German grammar and the linguistic side and everything. So I could look at these sort of grammatical models and basically put the vocab in and make my own examples, because as a linguist, I'm able to do that. It's not a method that I would use with my students, because not everyone's a linguist. But for me, it was more about the fact that I just didn't find the lessons inspiring. The teacher was generally quite dull, and it just didn't give me that motivation to really push it.
So grammar approach sucks, right?
It does. Again, it depends how it's done. There's many issues with it. This teacher, I remember making the same mistakes in the early days as well, teaching when it was like, say, present perfect. For example, many teachers feel that I want to show how good I am. I want to show my knowledge to the class. I'm going to explain everything about present perfect. And you realize you just destroy your students' brains because it's just too much to handle. Even like, when we try to push this, future continue or future perfect or future perfect continuous is so rarely used. It's like, you know what? I'll explain a bit of it, but we're not going to focus too heavily on it because it's just not common. It's so rare. And I sort of changed my approach over the past, I suppose, few years.
Yeah. I just want to say, yesterday I had a speaking club, and among guests there were two ladies. One was really afraid to speak out because she was constantly thinking how correct it will be to say this or that phrase, and so she was keeping silence most of the time.
Yes.
And there was the other one who was just speaking non-stop.
Yep.
Her grammar was awful. but I still got the idea of what she was going to say. And I must say that she had quite a big vocabulary range. And it was much interesting because while she was talking incorrectly, inaccurately, I still was able to understand the ideas.
Mm-hmm. That just reminds me of a situation I was in, exactly the same when I was a student in Germany, because I was like that quiet student of yours where I wanted to be correct. I had to be correct because that's what I was taught to do. So I was actually with another English guy at this German university from my course, and he was a bit more confident than I was. And he didn't really care about mistakes. He made a lot more mistakes than I did, but he really learned, you know, the vocab, and he was able to speak more and, you know, generate more conversations than I would, because I was so worried about being correct that I limited myself. And I said I'd rather shut up than, you know, have a chat with someone because I was worried. And it's only like watching this guy, this friend of mine, that I realized maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I should just speak. And I realized a big part of it is a confidence thing more than anything.
I think for a teacher it's also difficult because you're kind of perfectionist in a way. And you want to speak correctly. You are teaching a foreign language and English as a foreign language, and you want to speak Russian correctly.
And I think it's true. And I think the problem with that is because on one hand, perfectionism can be very negative because we put ourselves under immense pressure because there's no such thing as perfection. You can get close enough. That's what Michael Swan once said. You know, that's what you should aim for, like, you know, to be good enough or close enough. And I remember in some cases with my German trying to aim for perfection, and it's just impossible. You can get really, really, really good, and you should aim for that. But I think when you put yourself under too much pressure, you can collapse, you can, you know, break up, and it's just not the right approach, to be honest.
Okay. So a quick sum up. Don't be afraid to speak.
No,
you will be making mistakes, but it's okay.
That's why pencils have rubbers on the end, because people make mistakes.
Yeah. So everybody is as shy as you are.
Absolutely.
So, but this shyness will probably go away when you start speaking and do it on a regular basis, and learn vocabulary, learn natural ways of saying things, and you will be much better off.
Absolutely.
I wanted to switch the topic a little bit from the learning the language to some personal issues. I know you're writing a book.
Yes.
How did you come to this idea of writing a book? What made you start?
Well, actually, I started the book about like 10 years ago, and I kind of wrote half of it, and I just kind of stopped for about a year to come back to it. And I realized that year after year in Russia, I get to know the mentality, the culture, so much more, all these little nuances that I only recently discovered. And so with the book, it's more like a sort of personal ambition, I would say, like a bucket list where, you know, you want to achieve certain things in life, and one of them is to open a business, one was to swim with great white sharks, another one is to publish a book. And you know, a lot of the posts that I make on VK where I talk about Russia is really testing the water. So I like to see how Russians respond, if Russians agree, if my information is accurate, my observations are correct. And so I decided to write a book to support Russia. So something that Russians could read and identify with, and also that would show the wider world there are many unknown things about Russia which make this place very special. Some things which can be very strange, but it's a part of the whole Russian soul, like having a broken bath in the garden at the dacha, for example, or, you know, just sitting around having shashlik and vegetables from the garden with your friends. There's something very special about it. And I want to sort of write a book about that to sort of show Russia in a positive light, because for me, as someone who's been here for so long, and my daughter's Russian and, you know, family's Russian, and you know, I love my students, I love my friends. And when I sort of read articles from my country that are rather negative towards Russia, I take it personally, because it's like we always preach about, you know, not showing any kind of ignorance towards ethnicity.
Intolerance.
Exactly, but we're not towards Russia, and I find that hypocritical. And so my aim is to sort of try and set the record straight by saying, well, do you know what? There are some amazing things here. Yes, there are problems. We can't deny that. Every country has. Look at England at the moment and Brexit. We're a laughing stock right now. But with Russia, there are just so many wonderful things that just make me fall in love with this place day after day. And so I want to get the book done and hopefully at some stage publish it.
I must say that the notes that I have seen are quite shrewd, quite open, quite straight sometimes, and full of wonderful humor of yours. Have you always had it, or have you learned? Have you developed it? I mean, this sense of humor, because everybody just adores it, you know.
Oh, bless. Actually, it's quite interesting. I would say that I try to develop it because I think that when you kind of study languages and you actually, when you look at phrasal verbs, for example, when we teach phrasal verbs, most phrasal verbs have more than one meaning, and we have this word association, play with words, play on words. And I kind of look at, say, a phrasal verb. I can imagine taking a second phrasal verb meaning and actually making a joke out of it and things like that. And but actually, where the sort of humor came from, and I remember this very, very well. It was when I was learning German, not before university, when I was doing my A levels, and I had a very good teacher. And again, I had to learn a lot of vocab. And within the 2 years that we were studying A levels, I had to acquire a lot of vocabulary, a huge amount. And I tried to study through association. And for me, what worked really well was to actually make my own silly, humorous examples. Like, just string a sentence together about something funny. Like, if I might say, like in German, like for Christmas, I want to get an aircraft carrier fully decked out with aeroplanes and, to get a nice bowl of fish and chip, whatever, anything stupid. And I would remember. And actually, when people look at my VK posts, when I actually put some, silly examples, is actually for a reason, because it's to sort of try and make the language more memorable. So through some kind of association, that people can actually think, oh, I just like literally just like a few moments ago, I posted 10 rarely used adjectives of trait of character that I want to see as CAE and CPE, and I gave some silly examples. The students can read, they go, oh, I remember that. That's Paul's example about gullible or flamboyant or self-righteous. And it will stick in their heads a lot more rather than the typical boring, mundane examples. You see, so it's kind of like my little twist, and I'm very sort of observant, I would say. So whenever I'm out and about or doing whatever, I always look at something and take a step back and actually process that in my head. Like even when I came back from Crimea the other day, like really, really late. I got on the plane and the stewardess looked at my ticket and she said, "Prosta tuda, priama," and it's like, really, like you're telling me I can dress myself. I can, I found my way to the airport. I think I can find my way down a single aisle of an airplane to my seat. Kind of
Thanks,
thing.
Captain. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like little things like that that I like to think about, and so it's more about I like the humor through observation. I think that's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was actually thinking in the same way. I think when you get to know how rich the language is, and when you master some collocations and idioms, you want to play with them, and it gets easier. And your weird examples sometimes, they will make sure that the students will read your posts up to the end.
Absolutely.
In order to see another hamster or some other funny creature.
I remember you said that at the St. Petersburg seminar. I remember you made that comment. Yeah, it's some people who don't know me might just think it's just out of sheer stupidity. It's not. It's there for a reason. It's like you said, people read to the end. And I want to make the examples memorable, so there's vocabulary in context that just adds a bit of a twist, just to kind of make it a bit more interesting, because language learning is a chore. It really is a long-winded, long process. It's tiresome. It can sometimes be very demotivating. So especially like when I teach, say, CAE and CPE, as well as other things, I like to add a lot of humor into the lessons, because it just makes something which can be a bit mundane a bit more enjoyable. And that is my personal touch, and students like it. There's nothing harsh or evil or anything. It's just, a little bit of tongue in cheek, so to say. And students are kind of happy to come back, because it creates a sort of not just a class, but a social environment for people just to come to and enjoy themselves as well as learn English.
Yeah. I like having fun during the class as well. I say if I don't have fun, the class is just isn't working for me.
It is. Yeah. And I don't think humor is a good thing to add in teaching. Again, I think one of the problems among many Russian teachers is that those who are old school, who like to follow the old ways, believe that you have to be strict. And I've met many teachers on my travels who, as soon as they step into the classroom, they try to have this fake authoritative sort of persona. And I tell them, why don't you just sort of be yourself? You're a funny, humorous, enjoyable person. You're very likable. Just be that in the class, and your students will just be magnetized so much more. And I think, again, not everyone likes to have a strong sense of humor, but I have read many articles from in Britain about teaching that says, if you can add some humor or, you know, some smiles and some games to the class, do it. Students really like it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I assume the two final bits of your speech have been trying to enjoy the class, yeah, add some sense of humor to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
That's my personal touch.
Yeah, because if you want to make English a part of your life,
yeah,
it shouldn't be just something boring or something really difficult. It should be something enjoyable.
Absolutely, because, you know, it's like, I know for a fact that, like, if I go to the gym quite a lot, and I've had several trainers, and those trainers who tend to be quite humorous and, you know, quite affable, you know, they magnetize me so much more. Those who tend to be really serious, I sometimes feel worried just being in their presence. And so through my own personal experiences, I try to assert that into my classes. And I think personalization is a very important part of the job.
Yeah, right. Okay, so it was really, really interesting, and I want to say to people who will be watching this, in the comments to this video, you can ask Paul some questions, and maybe in our next videos we are going to discuss them. And also in the comments to this post, I will give you the links to Paul's Newson school, so that you could get acquainted, follow him, read his posts. You will have a lot of fun along with learning real English, I promise.
Oh, very
sweet. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, hopefully it was the first but not the last videos
of ours
together. Okay, so
okay, see you later.
Bye, guys.